Welcome back to Smitty's Learning Room. Today we're going to start having a look at types of training and specifically having a look at the aerobic training. So we'll start by having a look at whereabouts this actually comes from in the syllabus, and it comes under the focus question, how does training affect performance? And then specifically having a look at the types of training, and today we're just having a look at the aerobic training. So for example, continuous, fartlek, aerobic, interval and circuit training. There are 4 types of training that we will look at in this course. We have aerobic training, anaerobic training, flexibility training and strength training. As mentioned before, this video has a look at the aerobic training method. So as mentioned before, we have 4 different types of aerobic training. We'll start with the continuous training method. Now the continuous training method is just a concept of training continuously for longer periods of time at a steady intensity. This allows athletes to build their aerobic base. So for athletes that might be returning to play after injury or after an off-season, might use continuous training to build that aerobic base up again. And obviously this base is important for events of a continuous nature, such as an 800-metre run, athletes who are swimming more than 400 metres, or cyclists who swim more than 10 kilometres. The next form of aerobic training we have a look at is fartlek training. Now fartlek training, while completing a continuous activity, allows for bursts of high intensity activity to be periodically incorporated. Now this approach is commonly used by athletes to overload the anaerobic threshold, or by athletes training for games such as football codes, netball or basketball. And this is because fartlek training mirrors the demands of many team sports, where periods of low to moderate levels of intensity are required throughout the game just to move around the field, and then all of a sudden they'll have to have a burst of energy to, say, go and get the ball or to try and make an intercept. So you'll see here from this diagram that you've got continuous sort of efforts of lower intensity and then a burst of effort put in there. So an example of this might be using a 400-metre track, where you might do a 300-metre float, so low intensity running, and then 100 metres of faster effort running, followed by 300 metres of float, and then another 100 metres of faster running. The next type of aerobic training is aerobic interval training. And this basically looks at the concept of combining several high intensity bouts of activity for moderate duration with recovery periods in between. So if we have a look at this diagram here, we start here, we go around without effort, and then we will have a rest. And you'll see that we sort of repeat it several amount of times depending on the aerobic capacity of the athlete. An example of this training would be 5 by 4 minute bouts of activity at 90% of heart rate maximum, with an 8-minute recovery period between each effort. Now this approach is highly effective at overloading the anaerobic threshold and is effective at developing high levels of aerobic fitness suitable for nearly all sports with a high aerobic demand. The final type of aerobic training we'll have a look at is circuit training. Now circuit training basically looks at completing a succession of activities involving movement patterns and muscle groups, which elevate heart rate and ultimately provide an aerobic training benefit. Now this activity or this type of training is a great aerobic workout if athletes want to build muscular strength as well, because the activities that you can do within the circuits are very specific to the sport that the athlete is doing, and therefore can build muscular development whilst working on aerobic training. When coaches and athletes are planning aerobic training programs, many of them will incorporate a range of these approaches, so the continuous, fartlek, aerobic interval and circuit training, to allow for variety in the program. The approaches used will vary according to the athlete's specific training goals. The common component among these approaches is that they all enable an intensity of exercise to be reached, which keeps the athlete within their aerobic training zone for significant periods of time. The great part about aerobic training is that they can be manipulated so that the level of intensity within the zone can be modified. So the athlete can be allowed to work at lower levels or higher levels of intensity depending on whether they want to build aerobic threshold or just under anaerobic threshold. Make sure you have a look at Smitty's Learning Room in the near future to have a look at the types of training videos on anaerobic training, flexibility training and strength training.